Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. My name is Olivia Tuller and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on October 26th with Olivia Jewell. She will be giving a presentation entitled Discover, Gather, Connect: Ideas for Engaging in Family History as a Whole Family. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Maureen Brady, who will be giving a presentation on following the British diaspora. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Maureen. Maureen Brady, a former school librarian and computer educator, has 40 years' experience with family history research. She has traced her Scottish roots back to the end of the 17th century and beyond, and has also pursued Chicago and the Midwest, the Trans-Allegheny US, Quebec, Irish, and Swedish research. Maureen has made numerous presentations to genealogical societies, libraries, conferences, and workshops throughout the U.S., as well as presenting for the BYU Library Family History webinar series. She is a member of the Genealogical Speakers Guild, as well as a life member of the Aberdeen and Northeast Scotland Family History Society and the Ohio, Chicago, and McHenry County, Illinois Genealogical Societies. She is also active in the Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, and Lake County, Illinois Genealogical Societies, the British Interest Group of Wisconsin and Illinois, and the Chicago Scotch Genealogical Group. And we'll now turn the time over to Maureen if she's ready.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I believe there is a handout for this evening's presentation, and that will be distributed, I think, through chat, and it certainly will be available later when this comes up on the library. I'm starting this with a map of the British Empire as it appeared at the height of the empire at the end of the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th. One of my neighbors who was born in Canada said that his parents always said that the sun never set on the British Empire. And if you look at this map, you can understand the truth of that statement. Everywhere from Canada all the way down to New Zealand and even a little bit of South America and certainly the Caribbean. So when I talk about the British diaspora, I am talking about those people that left the British Isles, that is Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland, for any part of this red part of the map. I'm not going to be discussing United States immigration or even going to into Europe or other parts of the world. I'm looking only at movement within the British Empire. So first question always is, why did they go? Why did they leave the British Isles for parts around the world? And usually it was on some sort of ship that looked like this, perhaps bigger, perhaps smaller, but always, at least until quite late into the 19th century, a sailing ship of this type. These are not in any order. They are just as they occurred to me when I was developing this presentation. So the first one that came to my mind was soldiers. And I have a picture here of one of the Highland regiments in Revolutionary War era uniforms, because they were one of the main fighting units during the Revolution for the British against the American forces. But we go back even further for Scottish soldiers particularly, but British soldiers fighting for other countries or in other areas. Beginning in the 17th century, they were recruited by the Tsar or the Empress of Russia to fight for the various Russian armies in various battles of the 17th century. And then in the 18th century, they were the key element of the British forces during the American Revolution. And in the 19th century, then with the movement across the world for the broader empire, these British regiments then moved into all parts of the world, but especially Asia, the Middle East, and the Caribbean. And I might point out that many people don't think of the Middle East in the 19th century as being a location to look for British immigration. Another reason was greener pastures, and I put that in quotes because they often weren't greener pastures. But here's a picture of a gold miner, and this is actually from the Yukon area of Canada. But there were actually 4 gold rushes around the world that were within the empire. The Victoria Gold Rush in the state of Victoria, Australia from 1851 to 69, the Otago Gold Rush from 61 to 64 in New Zealand, Western Australia Gold Rushes 85 to 93 in Western Australia state, and then in Johannesburg, South Africa in 1886. So for about 50 years, there were various gold rush areas around the empire, not counting the ones in the United States, Canada, and California. I mean, Alaska and California. These are just within the empire. And these would have attracted many, 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 especially single men or young marrieds, to go and find their riches in these areas. Another reason that a lot of them moved for greener pastures was business opportunities in North America and the Caribbean. If you look at this picture, you can see it's in English. It's W. Phillip, and it says General Storekeeper. And this is actually a picture of a store in Quebec. I have found when I've been doing Quebec research, frequent references to baptisms and marriages for people who are of Scottish ancestry or Scottish birth. And they're always listed with the term Écosse, which is French for Scottish. And there are a lot of them primarily in the Montreal area. So if you are thinking about somebody coming in the 17th and 18th century into Canada, and they were from Scotland especially, you might want to check the Montreal church records. And then the Caribbean for the sugar plantations, either to oversee or actually manage, or in some cases own an actual sugar plantation anywhere within the British Caribbean. Then one of the key reasons, especially for the Irish and some other parts of the British Isles, was for more freedom. The Irish were particularly under English law, and it was very restrictive to those who were Catholic Irish. So beginning again in the early part of the 18th century, with William Penn offering free access to Penn's Woods, to his land grant that he received. And one of the key things about Penn's Woods was it was religious. There was religious freedom. There were no established state churches there. Being Irish and used to be living off the land and establishing their own little farmsteads, they would move to the various outward frontiers beyond the German settlement, which was along the Delaware River Valley, and move out toward the Allegheny Mountains, and then they eventually moved on into Virginia and so forth. But they first came from Ireland to Penn's Woods because he granted them freedom of religion, and they had voting rights and all the things they did not have in Ireland. Another reason for a lot of people disappearing from the British Isles and suddenly appearing in Australia, especially, but also Canada, United States early on, and various other parts of the Commonwealth, are their transportation, or they were transported as a sentence from a legal trial. This one you can see it has the convicts' names over here. One of them was crossed out. When and where they were sentenced. So this is Kent, there's Lancaster, and so on. There's Monmouth and so on. You can see all the counties represented. Here's the date of the sentence. These are all late 18th century. The term of the sentence. And so Charles Coleman here in Maidstone, Kent, was sentenced on 7 July 1780 for 7 years transportation, which in that case meant Australia. At the end of the 7 years, he could return to the British Isles, but being convicts, they didn't have much in the way of money to be able to afford that. So most of them stayed in Australia or New Zealand, moved on to New Zealand. The other transportation, major transportation that occurred, was as part of the Highland clearances. Now, this is one picture that I took from a book that I'll mention later on. The Highland clearances began around 1780 and continued to about 1820. It followed the Battle of Culloden, which was the last battle on British soil, and it was the English army totally decimating the army of Bonnie Prince Charlie and all of the forces that supported the Jacobite Revolution in Scotland. The Highland chiefs were forced to give up their land and their land claims, and the English king, which at that point when it started was George III, he granted then all of that land that he just received from the Highland chiefs to his friends and acquaintances and military allies and so forth all over Scotland. We now had English landlords for Scottish property, and they discovered that the most effective and efficient way to earn money was with sheep. Where if you're going to have sheep, you can't have small farms. So the Highland clearances were an organized effort to clear the northwest part of Scotland, primarily Caithness, Sutherland, and Ross and Cromarty. Of all of their population, all of those small farms, clear the land so that sheep could be introduced in large farm and actually large estates. Those people were sometimes given a chance to reestablish themselves in a village or as fishermen and remain in Scotland, but a large number of them were put on ships at the nearest port to their glen, and wherever that ship went, that's where they went. And so the Highland clearances find that the people of the Northwest, large number of them, will now show up in various parts of the empire, all coming out of those 3 county areas of Scotland and finding themselves somewhere in the empire, whether it would have been Canada, which would have been closer to their culture and their agriculture, or it could have been India or Australia or any number of places. So the clearances and the transportation schemes were a large measure of all of the people that moved out of the British Isles in the latter part of the 18th century. Another one was following the laird. Now the laird is the Scottish word for lord, and it refers to the major landowner of an estate in Scotland. And this would be a Scottish landlord, and they would be granted lands in the new areas of the empire. And the one I'm showing you here on this map is called the Red River Valley of the North. And this is the Red River, and it flows northward past Winnipeg and up into Hudson Bay. In the United States, that would be the Red River of Fargo, North Dakota. And then it goes from there north into Canada. There are 2 Red Rivers, one in Texas and one in the Dakotas and Minnesota. So this area was all granted to one person, but part of his grant was he had to bring people. So what he did is he arranged for a large number of the land tenants and farm workers from his estates in Scotland. He granted them passage and other helps to get them there to settle this region of what is today Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan primarily. This area was granted without any consideration to the Native Americans who live there. You can see where some of the forts are, and there was a lot of conflict between the natives and the newly transported and brought in Scots. Another reason was the Great Famine. Now, there was earlier Irish immigration, primarily in the 1740s, up through about the 1800s was a major period of the 18th century. But beginning in 1846, there was a famine that hit the potato crop of Ireland, as well as potatoes anywhere in Europe. This was actually a European famine, but it particularly hit the Irish because the potato was the main food of all of those small tenant farmers all throughout the island, the ones who were farming 5 acres or 3 acres, 10 or 15. I went to a presentation once on researching the famine, and they told us that in this period of time, a mature adult male working the land would have consumed 14 pounds of potatoes per day. That seems almost impossible, but that was their main food outside of a little bit of fish out of the streams. So when the potato crop failed in 46 and then 47, 48, 49, 50, and a little bit of 51, they were greatly hit without having much food. And the British government chose to not really help them in a very useful way. They did send some crops, but most of what was actually farmed in Ireland was shipped out for sale in other parts of the empire. So the Irish were in a very, very tight spot in the late 1840s. Over 1 million died and about 2 million immigrated, a goodly number of them to North America. Then we have employment. Now, this is a little bit beyond, this is not greener pastures in the sense that this was employment where they were recruited for a specific job with a specific company. Now, here's a picture of the Barry Granite Association. Now, this is Vermont, but it's right there at the Canadian border, so that's why I included it. And there were many, many Northeast Scotsmen, primarily from Aberdeenshire and Kincardineshire, who had worked the gravel pits, the granite pits of the Northeast, who were recruited to work in this area of Vermont, where this famous marble and granite is cut and sold. The other type of employment that was very often used, and I mentioned sugar before, but this is a picture of tea merchants, tea growers in Ceylon. And I found a family that had moved to Ceylon specifically for this purpose. He was a manager of one of the plantations, and I don't think he's in this picture, but it would have been an area with a lot of British influence in a time frame when the Ceylon people were somewhat subjugated to work on those in an almost slave type environment. So that's why they went, mostly. There's other reasons, of course, following family and so on. But where did they go then once they decided to leave? Well, this is a chart from Family Search that they produced about 3 months ago. And it shows by numbers those people that consider themselves of Scottish ancestry today. So obviously 5.4 million in Scotland, almost as many in the United States, 4.7 million in Canada, 1.8 million in Australia. The one that surprised me was Argentina, 100,000 in Argentina. Think cattle and cattle employment for that area, and then 26,000 in New Zealand. This is just one look at one part of the British Empire population, but I thought it would be useful to get your idea of where they might have gone. So where do we find our clues? This is the most important part of our research, is to look for the clues, and sometimes you have to read between the lines. But I have found my clues for all the parts of my family that went to various parts of the Commonwealth on all of these various places, monumental inscriptions and memorial stones, especially the memorial stones, when it memorializes someone who died in Barbados, or somebody who died in Iraq, or somebody who died in India, but the stone is in the north of Scotland or down toward Edinburgh or wherever. Certainly newspaper obituaries and articles are going to give you clues, and I'll show you later where you can get hold of some of those. Very often, it is the informant for a civil registration entry, particularly the deaths. Death civil registration, the informant could be somebody from actually a whole nother part of the world. And in fact, I found one of my cousins that way living in South Africa when he was informant for his father's death. He apparently had come north with enough time to be there for when his father died, and then he was the informant for the certificate. Social media. All of the family history societies in the British Isles that I know of have a Facebook presence, and they are very, very helpful with all kinds of answering questions, putting up pictures, showing the history. I have one that's called Cabrick in what is today Bamshire, or was Bamshire, and they've been posting pictures of the old farmsteads and showing maps of where these farmsteads were and so forth. So social media can give you a lot of help, and I can strongly suggest you get involved in the social media Facebook page for whatever area you're working in. And then finally, your family resources, Bibles, letters, stories, photographs, whatever you may find that would have a clue as to where else in the world they may have gone to. And what you're looking for are the people that you can find them when they're born. You maybe can find them when they're married in one or two censuses, and then they disappear. And you can't find any reference to a death. You can't find a reference to a burial. You can't find their children after maybe one or two censuses. So where might they have gone? And look to the whole British Empire for a potential site where they went, and start looking for the clues. So here's some of what I found in my research. These are all from my research. So first of all, Canada. I was directed to Canada because we had a picture of a lovely white-haired lady, and it was taken in Winnipeg. And we knew that, okay, it's somebody in the family who might be up in Winnipeg. It got us started searching. And here's the outline of William Washburn Duncan. He married Isabella Forsyth. That's a great, great aunt, and so forth. He was recruited. This is part of that employment reason by the Canadian National Railroad. They moved to Brandon, Manitoba, where he died in 1933. 69 years after they arrived, there was this lovely little article in the Brandon Daily Sun about them arriving in Brandon and how small it was, and it was just a tent town and so forth. And I found a lot of articles about this family in the Brandon Daily Sun, all of it on newspapers.com. In New Zealand, we had this reference in the Annals of the Free Church of Scotland, which was a short bios of all of the ministers of the Free Church from 1843 to 1900. And we had found an indication that this one great uncle had become a minister, and we found this entry for him with the reference that he resigned in 1867 and went to New Zealand, where he died. Now, this is where we were at for probably 20 years. But you always take the opportunity to spread the word, so to speak. And as part of this story, there was a time on one of the old social network sites, Roots Web, where I found a link to one of my family where I had actually researched and proven, but it was different from the link. And so I had contacted the person who put it up. We exchanged information and determined that, yes, what I had was correct and hers had come from an aunt and with no proof. Well, then she asked me what she could do for me. She lived in New Zealand. And so I said, well, I've got this great great uncle, and this is all we know about him. Well, this is Presbyterian. As it turned out, the lady that I was exchanging information with worked in the national office of the Presbyterian Church in New Zealand. And she went and looked him up and found his picture and one of the churches that he helped establish in the South Island of New Zealand, and actually found the history, his biography. And this is a short excerpt from the biography, that in February 1870, he had chartered a small steamer to go to a new parish. They got as far as Martin's Bay on the west coast of the South Island. And then they had run into a storm and the ship sank and all of their property was destroyed. But here's the best part of this. They got safely to land, though not without some difficulty. Mrs. McIntosh especially had good reason to remember the occurrence while she lived. On the shore, with no woman or other person possessed of even the smattering of medical skill present, she gave birth to a daughter. The child was called, after the district, Martinet Percy Whitworth McIntosh. Those are her three given names. Interestingly, as an adult, she was called Patty, but she was named after the bay where she was born, on the shore after the shipwreck of the ship. So you never know what you're going to find, and you're often going to find very interesting little stories like this. Looking in India, there was an obituary in the Aberdeen Weekly Journal in 1899 that Job Kirkland was a sergeant in the 74th Highlanders and that he did service in India. That's put us into India records, and we found there that his children, twins, Job Holmesdale Kirkland and Jane Kirkland, were born and baptized on the ship Holmesdale en route to India. Their baptism was noted in the register of St. John's Church in Bangalore with, quote, said to be born 11th July 1860 on board ship Holmesdale, baptized 12th July by Captain Ferrier, commander. So even in India, you can find English records because England was very large presence until about the late 1940s. And even though this took place on a ship, it is still recorded in the church that they would have attended once they got to land. There was another reference. This is in Nig, Kincardine, which is just to the south of Aberdeen. There is a memorial stone for Elspeth Morris, wife of Thomas Morris, who died in Shanghai on the 23rd of August, 1859, age 28. These are the clues. This was the results. Online records for the Old and New Cemetery, Shanghai, noted that Elspeth was buried in Shanghai on the 24th of August. So this was 1859, and a year later, her husband is living in Aberdeen. So this might have been a voyage that they took together. He perhaps was a merchant that was taking something out to Shanghai, and she accompanied him. They may have lived in Shanghai. That is still a mystery. But this reference on the stone in Nig took us to the records in the actual cemetery records from Shanghai. Looking at the Caribbean, another memorial stone also in Nig. William the Eldest died in Port of Spain, Trinidad, West Indies, shipmaster, 6 March 1896, age 58 years. And from that, we also have another one, this one up in Orderville, Banff. Alexander Gordon died in Tobago. Now, these records are just beginning to be available online and in digital format, so the research has not yet been done on either one of these deaths, but we certainly have exact death dates and places. So we will be working on that in the future. Here's another way. I mentioned letters. I know we won't all have letters, but this was a lucky happenstance, if you will. My cousin and I connected with cousins in Nova Scotia, and we were asking how they had determined that our great-great-grandfather was their great-great-great-uncle. And they said it was in the letter. Well, the letter they finally sent to us, they have the original that they digitized, and this is part of it. This was written in May of 1855 from my great-great-grandfather to his brother George living in Nova Scotia. And down here, you'll see that there's a reference that James and wife went to America until a place called Nicollet. Now, that's not much of a clue, but it is a clue because it does tell us it's the Midwest, or at least the Great Lakes area, because in both Canada and the United States, the place name Nicollet only occurs in that area. Unfortunately, he only stayed there 3 or 4 months and he came back home and so on. The letter then goes on and talks about the rest of the children that Alexander had. And here's his daughter Lily was married to an Alexander Taylor and so forth. Left 4 sons. The oldest is in the gold diggings. And that's what made me discover that there were gold fields in Australia, not just in the United States and Canada. And he's doing well enough that he has sent home 2 checks to her to give her some money to live on there in Scotland. So clues like this and the one before for Nicollet point to North America and Australia for this family. Here's another one that went on to America, but he's not identifying where. So letters stories, even the photographs, can give you the clues you might need. So by the time I got done, I had found members of my family in all of these green star places. So we have British Columbia, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, Trinidad, Tobago, and Barbados, Southern Caribbean, South Africa, Ceylon and India, Shanghai, Western Australia, New South Wales, Tasmania, and New Zealand. All of these areas have cousins, even today, that I have exchanged messages with, letters with, we've exchanged information. But this is the result, what you're looking at here on my screen. It's the result of 40 years of research, because the Ceylon one I just found about 6 months ago. So now that I've shown you why and the where, let's talk about how you find the information. The websites, I'm giving you 8 today. There are many, many, many more, but we're going to just show you the 8 major ones, as if you will. The first one I'm talking about, there's 4 that are the free sites, and the first one is Cindy's List. Now, Cindy is an organized list of websites. They have family history information, and it is organized by national level or regional level. So if you are working in the British Isles, you need to go to U for United Kingdom. If you are working in the Caribbean, Trinidad, Tobago, Antigua, any of those areas, you need to go C for Caribbean, and so on. To show you the possibilities, and this is just a small group of all of the various websites that she has listed. This is the Caribbean for birth, marriage, and death records. You can see that Ancestry has quite a number of them. English settlers in Barbados and British colonial dependencies. These are slave registers. We've also got Caribbean family history down here, primarily for Antigua and Barbados. There's another one for slave compensations that would have been paid to the white owners of the slaves, and so on. You can see there's 38 different links to information in this category alone on Cindy's List, and you can go on from there. So I can strongly suggest you look through Cindy. I'm sure you're going to find sites that you would never, ever have imagined existed. Then in Family Search, the Research Wiki is probably your best area to start, especially when you're just starting in a new part of the Commonwealth. You go up to the search function, and when that opens up, you come all the way down to Research Wiki. It's the bottom choice under search. And when you open that up, it's a giant map of the world, but there's a search box up here. You do not enter names. You enter occupations, you enter religions, you enter geographic places. So in that box, I'm going to type Canada. And as soon as I do that, you can see all the various articles. These are separate articles in the wiki pertaining to Canada, but the general one is this one right here, always the first. So I'm going to click on that, and this is what it looks like. Here's Canada, immigration and emigration. Here's the outline of everything that's covered. You notice that we have before 1865 and after for the refugees. We've got Grosse Ile, which is one of the main contact points for the Irish coming in the 1840s, and many of them died in Grosse Ile, and there are death records. Halifax for Nova Scotia, and so forth. Town of origin, we've got the immigration, the Loyalists. The Loyalists were those after the American Revolution who felt that they wanted to stay with the British Empire. They didn't want to become a part of this new country. And so they went north into Canada, and they are called the Loyalists. We also have emigration, and there's the Canadian diaspora listed there. All of this is different information. I'm just showing you the outline. Excuse me. And there are similar outlines for every single one of the countries of the British Commonwealth and the British Empire. Another place to go is RootsTech's video library. Now, RootsTech went for the past several years when they've had their conference in February and March each year. They have recorded the vast majority of the sessions, and they are now online as part of the Roots Tech video library. And you can come up here and you can search with this little magnifying glass. And there are many, 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 many lessons. But here's 2 for Australia. You notice there are 18 sessions that have been recorded about Australian research. The first one is online sources for immigration into Australia. Here's tips and tricks for researching the National Archives. This one's from 2022. This one's from 2023. You can watch it. You can, if there's a handout associated, there'll be a link for the handout and so forth. A vast library of learning videos on how to research and what records there are and how you access them for just about any part of the world now. Then another area that a lot of people are not aware of, but I feel you should be, and you should use it a lot, is the Periodical Source Index, or sometimes just referred to as PERSI. It is a subject index produced by the Genealogy Center of the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And they index the periodicals that they receive from the genealogical societies, the family history societies, the historical societies worldwide that send them copies of their journals and newsletters and any other publication in pamphlet form. And then Wayne County, the Allen County staff does an index, and it comes up frequently, at least monthly, updated, and this becomes a periodical source index. You can search by, an surname. I apologize for that. Or you can search by countries. You can see here's British Isles, Canada, and then all the rest of the world is down here. I'll give you an example of what you can find here. This is Barbados. I searched Barbados, and this is the topic, and these are the number of articles that are in magazines held by the Allen County Library with that topic. So history of Barbados, there are 503 articles. Passenger lists, there are 25. There's 16 about school records, 10 about cemeteries, and so forth. You open up each one of these, you get a short synopsis of what the article is about, when it was written, who wrote it, and so on. And then there's a link that you can actually order a copy of the article from the Allen County Public Library for a very reasonable cost. So it is a vast library of genealogical and family history information that you can access through PERSI. Or the only other way is to go to Allen County Library in Fort Wayne, but this gives us access all over the world on internet. Now those 4 were free. You can use them for free, you can access them and print out and all of that. Now the next 4 on your handout are these 4, all of which are either a subscription website such as Ancestry, or it could be a fee-for-service website. But I've given you the 4 main ones for British heritage, British research around the world. I would note that though you have to pay for all of these, all of the family search centers across the United States, at least, have free access to all 4 of these sites. And that one article I found was in newspapers.com, but I have found others in the British Newspaper Archive as well. Deaths, marriages, births, all sorts of things. So newspapers are very important, and this is one good source for the British Isles, where you're going to find information about people who live in another part of the world. Maybe they came home to visit. Maybe the family in the British Isles received notice of their death or some sort of information like that. Then in my handout, I have given you a bibliography of some suggested sources. This is not exhaustive by any means, but one in particular I want you to note on is the David Dobson books. Now, David Dobson is an author still working, and as of right now, he has published over 100 volumes where he is trying to identify as much as possible all of the immigrants from the British Isles to the various parts of the world using original records that he has found either in England or Scotland, Edinburgh or Kew or Dublin, or perhaps in Ottawa, or maybe even Washington, D.C. He's gone to where the records are. He's extracted what information he can find, and he's published over 100 books. On your handout, I've listed only a small sample. If you want to see his entire list, go to the Family Search Wiki and enter David Dobson, and it has the entire list there. But here's one of them, Irish Immigrants in North America, parts 1, 2, and 3 of 7. It's now up to 7. Another one I would want you to be aware of, and maybe you could find it in your public library, is Albion Seed, 4 British Folkways in America. It was written by David Hackett Fisher. And what he has done is followed the 4 major groups that settled the United States colonies, what became the United States. So the Massachusetts Bay and Connecticut, the Delaware Valley, Virginia, and then the Scots-Irish. The Delaware Valley being primarily the Quakers of England. Here's an example of one of the things that you can find in Albion Seed. There's a lot of maps and illustrations. And this one shows the origin of Virginia's parish names. All of the parish names for Virginia come from these counties in England. So if you have people who are in England, 1770s, 1760s, or earlier, rather in Virginia, and you can't find where they came from, these are the counties you would focus on. And there's similar maps for all the other parts of the colonies. He talks about the various culture and the habits and the social mores. It's an excellent book to give you a huge background on that part of the settlement. It is the United States, but I felt I should include it because there is so much information in this one book. And then the other one I want to mention from the bibliography is John Preble's The Highland Clearances. If you are trying to find someone where a clan map or a surname book has indicated that the name came out of Caithness or Sutherland or Ross and Cromarty, you would want to read this book and become familiar with what it's saying and suggesting as to where those families may have been sent to and then where they came from. So those are my 3 suggestions from the bibliography, but particular David Dobson. And now I just close with enjoy the journey. So that's the end of the presentation. I cannot iterate enough how you just keep looking for those clues. These are not the type of travels that are going to pop up in an easily found format for the most part. So you have to pay attention to who the informants are on the certificates. You have to look for the newspaper articles about the family. You need to search through photographs and the names of photographers and where that photograph was taken. All those kinds of references, the memorial stones in the British Isles, many of them have been transcribed and are online. And if not, the local family history societies all have websites where you could request them to go out and search a cemetery for a stone. Certainly Find My Grave and Billion Graves has a lot of the British stones on it, including the memorial stones. So you can also check there. You just need to keep looking. When somebody disappears, there's a reason. And if you can't find a death or something along those lines, then start looking for a clue to another part of the world.
Goodbye, you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on October 26th with Olivia Jewell. She will be giving a presentation entitled Discover, Gather, Connect, Ideas for Engaging in Family History as a Whole Family. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.